DJI and Zhiyun might be two of the most well-known names for gimbals, but Manfrotto is joining the ranks with the MVG220 and the MVG460. More known for their tripods and monopods, adding gimbal stabilization to its products portfolio is a natural move for Manfrotto. And we got our hands on the MVG220, so let's dive in and check it out. Hey everyone, Jordan here with 9 to 5 Toys. We do have the Manfrotto MVG220 gimbal here. And as you can see from some of that intro footage, that was all shot on this gimbal with this lens. I wasn't using this camera, this is the A7S II, but I was shooting on the A7S III so I could get that great autofocus. As you can see, it's a 3-axis gimbal. They also have a larger one, the MVG460 as well, which just has a increased payload capacity. For the 220 that we have here, it packs a weight limit of 4.8 pounds and it starts at $360, while the bigger MVG460 can handle up to 10 pounds and comes in at $500. And so first off, let's take a look at getting the MVG220 set up. It can take a little while to set up the MVG220 for the first time, but it does get easier the more that you use it and the more you're used to setting it up. The gimbal comes in a simple but handy carrying case, and when you open that case, the gimbal is locked in a storage mode. The gimbal also has an additional locked mode for balancing. It's easiest to mount the tripod feet on the bottom of the gimbal and stand the gimbal up to start balancing. And once the gimbal is upright, then you can lock the tilt axis and the roll axis in that balance mode. So this is the mode where it's locked to store in the case so it can lay flat in there. Obviously you would take the handle off as well, but I'm not gonna take that off at this point. And so once you get it out, you get the tripod connected to it and you stand it up, then you want to unlock the roll axis here, and then you can relock it so it's pointing horizontal here, and this is in the balance mode. And same with the tilt motor here. You can unlock it, it'll start swinging, and you can relock it so it's flat. And this is the position where you're going to want it to start balancing. And then once you have it in this position, you have everything mounted, you have, the plates on the camera and everything. Then it really is just following along in the manual and going through all the different pivot points, the different motors and axes here to get it balanced. And thankfully, because each of these lock, you're only dealing with one at a time, which is pretty handy, and it's not too bad. So one unfortunate part about that, here we have the carrying case, and it's pretty small. It does fit everything in there though, even all the additional accessories and everything. It's a pretty awesome little handy carrying case. But because of the way it's positioned in here, you can see where the gimbal will sit. You do have to return all of these adjustment points kind of back to their smallest, or their stock form. So any adjustments that you do to balance your setup, you'll have to undo to place it back in the carrying case, which is a bummer. That if you're always running the same camera and lens, you always know what it's going to weigh. It'd be great to just leave it and not have to touch it. But unfortunately, after balancing this, I had to put everything back basically, and it's the way that it came to fit in here, and then to use it again, you have to rebalance everything. So a little bit of a bummer there. And as we already kind of mentioned, Manfrotto does include this second handle on here. So this just bolts on to the side. It doesn't come installed. I'm sure you'll have to take it off to put it back in the carrying case as well. But this just adds a lot more versatility to holding the camera. It makes it a lot easier in some positions. So that is a great accessory to have on here. And there's even a little threaded point back here on the back, so you can add an accessory. So it's just a great addition to the gimbal. And we briefly mentioned the payload capacity on here, but that is just under 5 pounds. It's like 4.8 pounds, I believe, 2.2 kilograms. And so that was plenty for me in the systems that I use. I typically shoot on a Sony a7S III. It's what I'm using as my A cam now. I have an a7S II mounted on here just for demonstration purposes. The only issue that I ran into was when I was using the Sigma 24-70, which is mounted on there. It's I just couldn't get the weight balanced well enough on here. I had to keep pushing it further back because that Sigma lens is pretty long and it's pretty heavy. And so to try to balance it, it was hitting the motor here in the back, and so there just wasn't enough clearance in there to put that on. But otherwise, I really didn't have any issues with, you know, putting any sort of capacity on here. And most of the shooting that I did, I ended up using this Sony 50mm 1.8, which obviously is much more lightweight and fits really well on this rig. And if you are changing weights and rigs and setting up for the first time, one thing you definitely want to do is on the touchscreen, you want to navigate over to one of the menus where it says payload settings. And then you click on that, and then you can do auto adaptation, and this is going to set the actual like power level for all the different motors and really dial it into the payload that you have on there. So definitely do that if you are changing payload or the first time you use this. Definitely suggest doing that before the first time you use it. And speaking of controls, Manfrotto has an assortment of buttons, a joystick, a large rotary dial on the side, a trigger button, and a touchscreen. Besides displaying the current mode and battery status, the touchscreen also helps to quickly make adjustments. There are 5 different panels that can control movements, modes, and quickly swap to a selfie mode. The joystick controls the gimbal's pan and tilt directions. And while I can't find a way to adjust the speed of the joystick movement on the touchscreen, it can be adjusted through the Manfrotto gimbal app. Under the joystick are 3 buttons. On the left is a mode button that will switch between follow modes for the gimbal, which you can also do on the touchscreen. Next up is the shutter button, which can start and stop videos or take photos. One note on the shutter button is that this needs to be used in conjunction with the next button, which is the function button that will switch between photo and video mode. On my a7S III, for example, it needs to be in video mode to start and stop video clips, which is indicated with a little video camera symbol in the upper left-hand corner of the touchscreen rather than a photo camera icon. And on the left side of the gimbal is this large knob that you can use to adjust the tilt. And then if you push it in, you can actually adjust some different parameters too. So I just push it in, and now you can do the pan, and then one more time, and you can even do the roll here as well. So depending on what kind of shot you're doing, you know, if you don't want to use the joystick, you can just use this little control knob to make those adjustments. And it will track, you know, with how fast of movements you make too. So if you go really slow, it'll go slow. But then if you go fast, it'll speed up too. So kind of some neat functionality built in there. And on the front of the gimbal is this little trigger that has a few different uses. In the default mode, you know, if you usually have it on a kind of follow mode where if you pan left and right, it's following you. If you hold the trigger, it'll lock it. So it's not going to be following your movements. And if you double tap the trigger, it'll return to its kind of home point where it's pointing forward and the horizon is level as well. So it's kind of a quick and easy way to reset if your gimbal is kind of crazy and out of control. And a triple tap will turn it into a selfie mode. So it will turn it around and then the camera is pointing at you. So obviously if you want to shoot yourself, this is a quick and easy way to do that. And then if you want to go back to the other mode, just do a double tap and it'll return to that home position again. Further adjustments to the MVG220 can be made through the Manfrotto gimbal app. Tweaks to what the trigger button does and the joystick speed are easy to find and change in the app. You can control the gimbal wirelessly through the app as well, but it doesn't give the same finesse as the joystick. Instead of having like a speed curve by how far you move the joystick on the app, it's just one speed and it's like whatever the max is that you have set for those motors. So not nearly as much control on the app as what there is on the actual joystick of the gimbal. And Manfrotto does have a few accessories for the MVG220 and the MVG460, and one of which is this really awesome, they call it their Gim-boom. It's probably the worst feature about it is just the name. It's kind of a silly name. But basically this is like a monopod, but it's kind of like a quick, fast release monopod. It's almost like, you know, Darth Maul's double-headed lightsaber where you twist this middle part and then you can extend both ends. So instead of like a normal monopod where you have the 3 different clamps that you have to open up and adjust and then reclamp down, this is just a simple twist, and then you can adjust this monopod from, I think it's like 20 inches all the way up to like 46 inches. So, you know, just the functionality of that built into it is really cool. And having that extra reach from a boom like this on the gimbal is a really handy feature. It kind of opens up the world a little bit more to what kinds of shots you can get with a more lightweight gimbal like this. For example, in the fabrication sequence that I shot, I used the boom arm to grab a shot from top down on the tube bender. Basically, I extended it out all the way, I had the gimbal mounted on there, and I just held it above my head and then just kind of tracked along with it while the bender was going. And likewise with the last shot in the sequence, I used the boom arm as well to kind of pull the whole gimbal across the table. So this is a really cool accessory for the gimbal. It is $190, so quite a bit more, but I really do think that it adds a whole lot more functionality to the gimbal. But if you have another boom arm or something that you want to use, I mean, I think there's a 1/4 inch, and then there's also a 3/8 inch thread down at the bottom of the gimbal, so you can mount it on other accessories as well. Manfrotto also carries a follow focus, a remote control, and some other extensions for their gimbal line. So in use, with gimbals, they do add some great stabilization, but you do still need to make, some smooth movements. If you are walking and running along with this and you're, kind of bouncing it up and down, that vertical movement is going to get transferred into your footage. That's something like where the crazy new DJI Ronin 4D kind of eliminates that. They have another 4th axis that also keeps the camera steady vertically. Definitely check that out if you haven't yet. But when you are focusing on getting some really smooth movements and everything, I mean, you can get some really great shots with the MVG220. And like I said, having that extra handle really just makes this thing a lot easier to use. I also edit in Premiere Pro, and so I have warp stabilizer, but every other editing program's gonna have its own kind of stabilization little feature or software or plugin, and adding just a little bit of that to the footage really helps to take out any sort of little micro jitter or anything. There was even one shot, the final shot, where I was on the boom. I had it fully extended, and there was some little shake just in the raw clip, and just adding a little bit of warp stabilizer really helped to take that out. So just with a little bit of tweaking, you can really take this to the next level and get some really smooth shots. Occasionally when doing some really small, really delicate movements, there was this little horizontal almost twitch or tick or bump or something. And I tried a few times, trying to figure out what it was doing that. So I tried adjusting the motor strength and, making sure everything was perfectly balanced. But nothing I really did helped with that. But there was only really one shot that I noticed it. It was when he was doing the drill press. And I was just kind of trying to do this really slow kind of pull out with the gimbal. And I would just occasionally notice this little almost twitch or something in the pan axis, which like I said, I only really noticed it in that one shot, but once I started noticing it, it was super frustrating. This gimbal's using an internal battery, which is good for about 7 hours of shooting. Obviously, it would be great if this had, a swappable external battery that if you needed to go longer than 7 hours, or if you got to charge it, then you could just, pack that on here. But 7 hours for, something built in here at this price point, that's really pretty great. And then to recharge, there's just a USB-C port, and it takes about 1.5 hours to fully recharge it. So overall, wrapping up here, Manfrotto's entry into the gimbal market is a great offering at a really affordable price of just $360. The combination of features and build quality make it an easy recommendation from a well-known brand. And it will be exciting to see, what comes next for Manfrotto with gimbals. I actually think they just recently released a new one that I'd love to check out as well, because really, like I said, for the price and for the features, this really seems to be a pretty solid choice. Alright, and that'll wrap up our review of the Manfrotto MVG220 gimbal. Let us know what you think about it down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. This is Jordan with 9to5 Toys.